Today, we have presentations, first of all, from Elif Doyuran, who's a research fellow at Queensland University of Technology. We will then have a talk by Christina Krawec, who is a founder and consultant at EarthNote. After that, we will have a talk by Michelle Ni, who's a visiting fellow at the Technology and National Security Pillar at the Center for New American Security. And then we will have a talk by Chi-Hei Chung, who's a postdoctoral research associate at GRAIL, which is the Governance and Responsibility AI Lab at Purdue University. Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, maybe we can give people a warm welcome. Okay, wonderful. So to kick things off, I think I'll invite Elif up here to the stage.
So the research I'm presenting today is part of a bigger project where we look at this problem of authenticity in the context of generative AI and synthetic media and the industry and technical responses that this problem generates. And one of these responses, and perhaps the most prominent one, is the C2PA standard, which is a technical standard for establishing the origins and edit history of digital content that is now positioned as an AI identification method. The C2PA had quite a successful career in the short time that it's been around. It is now adopted by more than 5,000 organizations, including major AI providers and social media platforms, and it's on track to becoming an international standard for authenticating audiovisual media. So our paper tries to understand how come this standard has become so successful, so prominent in the AI risk governance space. While it's about a technical standard, it's not a technical evaluation. So we're not assessing whether or how robust or accurate C2PA is compared to the alternatives, or neither do we try to explain its success with reference to its assumed or proven technical superiority. Instead, we're interested in the institutional interests and projects that drive the standards development, its adoption, and its success. And what we find is that the different actors that are part of the Coalition for Content Provenance, and there are quite different actors, in addition to AI providers or regulators, we have human rights organizations or legacy media organizations, a creative software company. And what we find is that all these actors attach quite different meanings and functions to the standard. And some of these functions, in fact, surface a clear tension between private and public interest, and the current prominence that the standard enjoys appears to be driven as much by the commercial value that it brings as it's by the public value. To be more specific, we argue that there's now a shift in the framing of the standard as a tool that guarantees commercial safety, as opposed to its earlier framings as a public authenticity infrastructure. And when we look at the origins of the C2PA, that's what we actually find, that it's in a series of NGO-led projects that try to build a standard for authenticating human rights violation, photographic evidence of human rights violations so they can be admissible in court. One of the big actors there is Witness, who's also part of the coalition, and we've heard a presentation from Witness. They're continuing this work. So that public function of the C2PA standard is still there, even after the generative AI turn. But where it's become even more prominent, perhaps, is in the promotional and marketing material that surrounds Adobe's AI ecosystem. Adobe is the head of the Coalition for Content Provenance, and they are quite forcefully positioning themselves as the provider of enterprise AI. So that's AI that's trained on non-IP infringing content that promises a clear ownership of the generated brand assets and clear protection against legal, IP-related, or other reputational risks that are associated with other generative AI models. And within that market positioning and value proposition, the content provenance and the C2PA standard actually features quite prominently. And we are seeing Adobe innovate new use cases for provenance tracking as well, such as now clients can check how much AI was used in the work that they commission from marketing agencies or individual professional creatives. And this is also referred to or presented as a safeguard for the artists who would like to prove to their clients that their work is human-generated, but it does present a potential case for reputational lock-in in the sense that any other tool that an artist might want to use suddenly look less trustworthy and more risky. And in fact, Adobe does face quite serious backlash from the creative community, and we're seeing these workaround videos where photographers are teaching each other how to turn off provenance tracking, so these made with AI or edited with AI labels don't show up in their work. Now, all this controversy and the way safety now seems to be reconfigured as a mechanism for market capture, we argue raises some critical questions for the standard. Here are the questions. I highlight just one, which is what happens when safety can only be achieved within closed ecosystems that entrench the market power of big players? Is that really the kind of safety that we want? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and we now have Christina Krawec to present.
Good morning. I am delighted to be here today to discuss with you the nuclear verification techniques that the International Atomic Energy Agency uses for nuclear verification and how these techniques could be applied to the AI governance sphere. The IAEA is the United Nations nuclear watchdog, meaning that it is responsible for monitoring the nuclear programs of all countries worldwide and assessing that these countries are adhering to their international nuclear safeguards obligations and not illicitly developing nuclear weapons. The IAEA conducts these state evaluations through the collection of 3 different sources of information: state-provided or declared information, information from safeguards activities such as inspections, and other relevant information like open source information. As a prior open source analyst at the IAEA, I was particularly exposed to the different verification tools that are in use for conducting these state evaluations. And for the purposes of this research, I listed the 24 or so verification tools that the IAEA uses. I listed their technical specifications and mapped each to a potential AI analog and a potential use in the AI verification sphere. And this resulted in a massive spreadsheet that listed all of this data, all of this information, and these 24, 25 different tools. You are very welcome to take a look at this spreadsheet on your own time. But what this ended up displaying is a wide variety of application of the nuclear verification sphere to AI governance and verification. And there is a wide variety of applicability and feasibility of these tools. And when I say tools, I mean specific techniques that the IAEA uses in order to determine whether a country's nuclear program is operating as expected. So this could be environmental sampling, in which an inspector will actually take physical swipes to determine chemical composition at nuclear facilities, or design information questionnaires, in which a state is required to submit maps and blueprints of a nuclear facility to the IAEA. But in the short term, for AI verification, the category of verification that is the most usable for the short term are the techniques that fall under the umbrella of open source analysis. And the IAEA uses open source information for its assessment of state nuclear programs. So this could include commercial satellite imagery analysis, it could include trade data, imports, exports, and also includes the assessment of social media data, R&D publications, anything available to the public. And one particular tool that I wanted to highlight that could be of applicability to the AI governance sphere is the IAEA's Open Source Information System, or OSIS. This is an internally developed tool, a database that automatically scrapes open sources for safeguards-related information, collects it, processes it, and allows analysts to use it in a nuclear context. And so for the AI governance sphere, I posit that developing an OSIS for AI, in quotes, would be an interesting way to bring not only AI safety researchers together, but also international organizations and potential states, so that there could be this internal or communal database of all journal articles, social media posts, model development announcements and things like that related to model development or related to the development of data centers. So increasing transparency and availability of open source data to the AI research community would be one way to advance verification. And there are other ways that open source information could be utilized for the AI verification sphere, but I would be very happy to continue these discussions at the poster session later on today, and I very much look forward to chatting with all of you further on this topic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. And I would now like to introduce Michelle Nee, who's a visiting fellow at the Center for New American Security.
Thank you, and good morning. My name is Michelle Nee, and I'm here to present today a paper on how sovereign is sovereign compute. The motivation for this work is me and my fellow researchers wanted to explore who actually operates data centers outside of the US. This matters because of the nationality principle in international law, where a state can assert jurisdiction over its nationals, both people and companies, even when conduct occurs abroad. And our key finding is that US companies operate 48% of non-US data center value globally. And in this case, investment value was used as a proxy to compute capacity, meaning that a large share of compute capacity around the world is controlled by the US, or potentially subject to US control. There are two audiences for this finding. The US, which potentially has jurisdictional hooks over this computing power and can use it as a lever for governance, and other countries whose sovereignty might be compromised. To set the scene, sovereign compute, as we know, is kind of the policy du jour. Recent examples just in the last month alone include the OpenAI for India initiative, which was just announced at the India AI Impact Summit, and the AWS European Sovereign Cloud. And the assumption behind these investments is that local infrastructure equals local control, but our project puts that assumption to the test. We created a new data set of 775 non-US data center projects around the world across 123 countries, totaling $360 billion in investment. And it's important to note that this data is of Q3 2024, so some recent projects may not be included. For our methodology, we mostly use Perplexity AI, supplemented by Google Search and Data Center Dynamics, and all researchers verified each result manually. We logged a bunch of variables in our data set, and importantly, we tracked operators, not just builders or funders. The key limitation is that we often lacked publicly available information, especially on operator or investment value. We found that the US operated 18% of projects by count, but 48% by value, meaning that the US operates the biggest, most expensive projects. And for AI data centers specifically, the US is involved in 56% of value. Chinese firms account for a much smaller presence, accounting for 8% of projects by count and 5% of value, and essentially zero for AI data center value outside of China. There are many implications for US policymakers. The nationality principle means that the US can assert jurisdiction over US-operated data centers anywhere in the world. Combined with 54% of compute capacity already on US soil, this gives the US potential jurisdiction over about 76% of global compute, which is a very striking number. This makes operator-based governance potentially the second most powerful lever after export controls, and possibly more durable since it doesn't require losing revenue. There's also many implications for other countries outside of the US. The core message is that building locally does not necessarily mean controlling locally. Digital sovereignty has become a very important topic in technology policy around the world, but if your data centers are operated by American firms, you might not have true sovereignty. Countries here face a real trade-off because accepting foreign operators often means you can get better and more AI-optimized facilities since those are often run by the US. So governments around the world will have to decide if this trade-off is worth it. Thank you for your attention. We'd like to invite you to explore the data set using the QR code, and we also have a poster, so come and chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we have our final speaker from the first panel, who's Chi-Hei Chung, who is a postdoctoral research associate at the Government and Responsibility AI Lab at Purdue University.
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here to introduce my two of the papers, actually, starting off with corporate quasi-sovereignty today. Well, this paper is co-authored with the Professor Bright Dietrich at Purdue University. And basically, the background of this project is to think about the roles and impacts of big tech companies in the real world. We consider consumers' perspectives and the government perspectives, and when we talk about sovereignty, we also think about like sovereign AI from government perspective, but what about big tech companies who are actually making this thing work? There are two different cases that we thought very important to point out, and the first starts out with the Ukraine war, the use of Starlink in Ukraine war in 2022 and 2023. All of us experienced and saw how Elon Musk sent out and retrieved back SpaceX to Ukraine war and actually challenging the existing political dynamics as well as war dynamics. And we figured that a private CEO exercised as de facto wartime authority. Another very good example that I would like to point out is Meta versus Australian government in 2021. So obviously, in response to Australia's news media bargaining code, the legislation requiring platforms to compensate news publishers, Meta disabled access to all news contents on Facebook, actually inviting them to the discussion table afterwards. So here we figured out that not only big tech companies, but their CEOs hold capacity to substitute for a state authority. So we looked into the discussions of how sovereignty has been discussed and figured that there's a very good limitation with that, meaning that they consider tech companies or firms as the part of under their jurisdictions. However, we would like to present the keyword of corporate quasi-sovereignty, which refers to private corporations exercising sovereign-like authority over digital, geopolitical, and infrastructural domains, not through lobbying, but through an unilateral action grounded in the following three pillars. So the first pillar is infrastructure command. Well, I'm not going to go over all the details, but then it's about actually the control over infrastructure and foundational systems that tech company has. The second pillar is executive autonomy. So here we argue that decision power is actually concentrated to big tech company CEOs. The last pillar is normative and geopolitical assertion, which is quite important because they have the power to set norm settings in the global society. So when does it happen? How does it happen? In order to explain that, we actually looked into Kingdom's multiple stream framework and tried to apply that into the discussion of sovereign window, meaning that it opens when the firm internally aligns three different streams, including problem, policy, and politics stream. Here we argue that problem stream is defining crisis, policy stream is capacity to act, and politics stream is discretion to act. What is important here is, unlike existing multiple stream frameworks policy window, these occur actually inside firms, often without public visibility. So basically, the important part that we would like to argue here is that CEOs of big tech companies especially, are starting to act as sovereign architect with discretionary intervention power that was not given by the people, nor having the legal authority. However, firms are mimicking the act of public guidelines, but without accountability of public office. So this is the very first phase of our big project. We're going to build a big data set and database to analyze what kind of typologies or categories or what kind of characteristics of corporate quasi-sovereignty is actually happening in the real world cases. So please join us for our poster session, and also this is under review, so you may access the full paper through the QR code if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much for these wonderful presentations. I realize I forgot to introduce myself, so I should do that very quickly. My name's Yason Gabriel. I'm a research scientist at Google DeepMind, where I lead an AGI and society research team. So I think one of the really interesting questions that comes up in the context of discussion of regulation across these different domains that we've explored is the question of how to balance considerations of openness against considerations of control, right? And typically people who want a system to be more open are concerned about concentration of power, and people who are concerned about risk index heavily on control. So I understand that we have these different case studies almost that have been presented here today. Could you say a little bit about how you think that dynamic plays out in your given domain, and a little bit about what an ideal governance regime might look like? And people can volunteer to go first. I won't single anyone out.
Well, apologies, I couldn't hear you well, but then as far as I understood, it's more like looking into the important risks and the governance structure, right? That's ideal. Yeah, great. Well, that's a very important question for us to think about right now, I guess, because as I just presented, these risks are not only about consumer perspective-based risks or government-based risks, but then it's more like a systematic and political dynamics and international relations dynamics, sort of risks that actually challenges the existing roles and impacts of each stakeholder within the existing political, economic, whatever status that you're thinking of. So basically, in order to have like the ideal governance to deal with those kind of problems, first we have to understand what's the problem, right? And then we have to have the discussion of like who governs what and how. However, the reason why I'm not presenting the answer about like what kind of governance system that I'm thinking of is because we don't even know what we are looking for. So basically, I think we have to gather up with the different stakeholders at the moment and try to find the answers to those questions of like who needs to govern what and how, and what are the actual risks that we're going to be looking for to solve out. That should be done in advance to talk about like what kind of governance structure or like systems that we're going to be able to build in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And maybe, yeah, please, by all means, thank you.
So I think maybe we can think a little bit about this dichotomy between openness and safety, and to what extent it's based on empirical evidence, or at least to what extent we know how much certain risks are enhanced with openness versus how much of it is sort of this in the interest of commercial actors to present it as such. So to refer back to the keynote from today, that the usage of certain knowledge claims, not so much as representations of truth, but as strategic claims that companies make in order to, increase their own value or for some kind of commercial project. So with the Adobe example, we see that there's a lot of emphasis on that the closed system is the one that is safe, but it's also a specific product offering in the market. So it's not, I think it's just in general, we need to be a bit more precise about the dynamics or the interactions between openness and safety.
Thank you so much. And we've had a number of questions from the audience who are particularly interested in the data center question. So among other things, people want to know whether the fact that the physical asset is located in a country gives government special levers in kind of more emergency type situations. And they also want to know whether data centers can be hidden.
What was the last question?
Whether data centers can be hidden in some way.
Yes, so the first question is interesting because, yes, under international law, there's the nationality principle, which I described, in which nations can assert jurisdiction extraterritorially over their companies and people, even if conduct occurs abroad. But there's also the territorial principle, which is a bit more common for data centers and kind of physical infrastructure in which states can assert jurisdiction over infrastructure that's located within their borders. So kind of competing theories of who has jurisdiction over what infrastructure, but we wanted to explore more of the nationality principle because we found that was underexplored for data centers. And the second question is interesting also because, there's obviously not a lot of public information, especially for, really sensitive national projects or supercomputers and things like that. So an example of this is we tried to figure out which, types of chips and GPUs the AI data centers had for different projects, and that often was not available. When it was available, we pretty much only could discern that they were US-based chips, but obviously that information isn't always released, so that is a limitation of our data set.
I'd love to add a little bit to that as well. One of my side research projects was also looking at how to track data center development and operation using open source commercial satellite imagery. And as a satellite imagery analyst, that was one of the biggest questions that I was getting as a result of the research of can data centers be hidden, and can you hide them from the view of electro-optical satellite imagery? And the short answer to that question is it sort of depends. These huge hyperscale data center facilities cover such a wide stretch of land that it would be quite difficult to hide them. I mean, in theory, it's possible that you might be able to hide some data center facilities within a mountain or underground, but I think we're still at the beginnings of actually seeing whether or not this is feasible, or whether data centers could be launched into space or hidden underneath the seas. Like, this is all very experimental, but it is a question that is ongoing in the satellite imagery and remote sensing field right now.
Thank you so much. And so another question is, as people in the European Union are well aware, setting standards is very political, right? And it's often, the accusation is it's a way of masking the exercise of power by one set of actors. So we've seen that in some of the presentations today. A number of the questions we have are about the role of, middle power countries, as they're characterized here. And kind of outside constituencies who might, are sometimes positioned as kind of the rule takers, but could potentially play a more active role in the development of the direction of AI. Do any of you have reflections on these kinds of questions?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. So I wrote about this recently in that most countries, especially middle powers, when they pursue sovereignty strategies, they want a few key things. They want an asset that brings real economic value. They want to, not have another player be able to turn off their critical infrastructure. And they also want an asset that brings them leverage at the global bargaining table. So I think that yeah, focusing on the last bit, bringing unique talents and resources to provide leverage and really build compute within your borders and potentially lease it out to other countries, or just being able to have actual assets that bring leverage to the global bargaining table is an underappreciated strategy.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So we'll have one more round of applause for these panelists, and then we will introduce the second stage. Thank you. And for the audience members, I saw there were a lot of questions about China, and we will shortly have a presentation on that topic. So we'll use those in the second discussion. Okay. Too many. Sorry, too many microphones. Okay, wonderful. So for the second session, we will have a second presentation from Chi-Hai Chung, but this time on AI and the social contract. That should be really exciting. After that, we'll have a presentation from Peter Barnett, who's a technical governance researcher at the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. After that, we'll have a presentation from Gabriel Wagner, who's an international governance researcher at Concordia. And we will conclude the panel with a presentation from Mattia Franklin, who's a research scientist at Google DeepMind. So to commence the second session, Chi-Hai, please feel free.
Hello again. Thanks so much for having me again for this project that I conducted with Professor Daniel Schiff, who is sitting right there, actually, under the title of AI and the Social Contract. Well, before I begin, I would like to ask you a question to think about, like, why social contract? It seems so old and, like, those theoretical. We talk about, like, tangible things and practical things, like over last one day and today as well. I would like to think about it since that it's a very foundational framework for evaluating the legitimacy of political authority. So basically, we're saying through social contract that public consent is given to the government to give out legitimate authority to govern us. And however, in algorithmic environments, decisions are often arise from diverse factors, including opacity, private data sets, epistemic asymmetry, as well as the international real-time influence, which makes it very difficult for the existing social contract to be sustained. So actually, does that mean that existing social contract need reconfiguration? That is the question that we would like to ask with our study. This kind of concern is actually shared, interestingly, in industry as well. As Sam Altman, I'm not going to go through the quotation. However, he mentioned about the rapid development of AI technologies and the possibility of reconfiguration or need of the reconfiguration of social contract. So in our study, we try to examine existing AI governance with the lens of existing social contract theories. However, it is very important to understand that we still have very little understanding of how effectively those canonical theories can account for AI structural features, and also whether their solutions and underlying assumptions remain adequate in the AI era. So what we did within our paper was to conduct comparative analysis with the 5 different distinguishing canonical theories about social contract, including Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Rawls, and Nozick. And based on that comparative analysis, we figured their limitations and tried to present what we called hybrid principles, where we can actually use the philosopher's thoughts and directions to be applied in the AI era better with some examples. Well, I'll try not to bore you with going over every single analysis that we did with those 5 theorists. However, I would like to state that the important finding here is that those 5 theorists existing studies hold limitation to be applied directly to AI era and AI challenges. So for instance, Hobbesian theory, he focuses on safety and controllability. However, it is very difficult to be applied since we have accountability gap. What about Locke? He mentioned us a lot about consent and right to exit, but platform business doesn't really allow that to the people. Rousseau, on the other hand, he looks into the co-authorship very importantly, but however, AI development actually bypasses this collective participation. Rawls is all about justice with fairness. However, we all know the problems with bias and inequality that AI algorithm could provide. Lastly, Nozick states a minimal state intervention, but existing AI algorithm actually has structural platform power itself. So what do we do with this? Well, we try to mitigate the existing limitation by presenting them as hybrid principles, including distributed accountability, reversibility, co-authorship, fairness, transparency, recognition, as well as minimum coercion and practical alternatives. I know it's going to be very high level and that it might seem very, very vague. However, we try to show some example cases in welfare system and healthcare system where those kind of hybrid principles could actually be used in real case scenarios. But as you know, I'm running out of time, so you can visit us for our poster session for further discussion. And this paper is actually published at the AAA IASEAI IAEA conference proceedings, so please read it through if you're interested. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We now have Peter Barnett, who's from MIRI, to present.
Hello, I'm Peter from the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, and I'll be presenting some work on an international agreement to prevent the premature creation of artificial superintelligence. So we'll start with an overview of AI risk. It seems uncomfortably likely that humanity is on course to build artificial superintelligence. And if this is the case, society is going to face many major risks from this coming development. Most centrally, I'm concerned about loss of control, where AI systems pursue unintended goals and potentially disempower humanity. And when I say disempower humanity, I think the main way this could happen is by AI systems violently killing all humans. But there's other risks as well. Malicious actors could misuse AI systems for catastrophic harm. There's risks of war and geopolitical destabilization as nations race to build more and more powerful AI systems. And even if we avoid these risks, maybe these advanced AI systems entrench power into the hands of authoritarian rulers forever. And these kind of risks are accepted by the leaders of the AI companies. Many of them state between 10 and 30% that this could happen. Some even higher. And notable academics and safety experts often say between 20, 50%, and again, sometimes even higher. This is just totally unacceptable by any normal standard. This is just not how society normally deals with this type of risk. I don't think that we should be blindly letting this happen. So what should we do? In our paper, we propose a draft international agreement which, if implemented, we believe would postpone the development of artificial superintelligence until it can be done safely and until some other key issues are solved, such as these governance issues. We think this could potentially require decades, and so our agreement is designed to be robust to those timescales. So there's a key challenge with international agreements, and that is that states do not trust each other. And because they don't trust each other, they might defect because they think that other states might also defect. But there's also a solution here, and that solution is to verify every part of the agreement, such that states can have reasonable confidence that the other states are complying. I'm glad that Christina talked about verification. I think many of those methods are relevant here. So what's the high-level plan? I guess we think about controlling three key elements. The AI chips, AI training, and AI research. For AI chips, the plan is to locate and centralize AI chips into monitored data centers to monitor all new AI chip production, so that means no new chips aren't monitored. For AI training, we ban large-scale AI training to prevent the progression of further AI capabilities, and we monitor the mid-sized training runs. For research, we ban AI algorithmic and hardware progress research that would allow AI systems to be created more efficiently. We also ban things like distributed training, which could also undermine the agreement. For the governance structure, we imagine we have a coalition of states, but it probably has to be US-China led. And there's various verification mechanisms here, which I know have already been discussed. We think inspections, whistleblower protections, and things like state intelligence are going to be crucial here. And this is all backed up with non-proliferation measures and other enforcement measures. Such as for non-proliferation, we have standard export control measures, just like we have for nuclear materials to stop some states not getting access. And for enforcement measures, we have an escalating response to non-compliance, starting with standard diplomatic things like sanctions, and potentially escalating to military action if this is required. Here's kind of the agreement, but it's kind of a lot of detail, so you don't need to read that. I want to make one overall claim, and that is that this agreement works. This agreement, if enacted, could prevent the premature creation of artificial superintelligence until we're ready. So why does this work? It works because we're trying to stop AI capabilities progress. We can stop large-scale AI training. We can ban AI research. We can verify that there's no large-scale AI training because we're controlling the chips. We can locate the chips, we can track new chips, and we can monitor chip use with verification tech to make sure they're not being used for banned activities. We can also ban dangerous AI research. I think probably this should be implemented with domestic bans, which I expect to work because generally people don't like breaking the law. And then this is verified with international verification, which probably looks like interviewing researchers and that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, this is all backed up with this non-proliferation and enforcement to put some really teeth behind this agreement. This talk was a pretty short version of the whole agreement and missed out on a few many of the details. So yeah, but I hope that you've somewhat convinced that it is in fact possible to prevent the creation of superintelligence if we want to. If you want to know more, you can come talk to me, view our poster, or read our paper. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we have Gabriel Wagner or Wagner, please clarify, from Concordia, Wagner, to present on Chinese AI relations.
Good morning, everybody. I'm very glad to hear that there seems to be a lot of interest in the audience in China. I'm a researcher at Concordia AI, which is a Beijing-based social enterprise focused on AI safety and governance. And the presentation I'm going to give is based on our State of AI Safety in China report, which really gives a very comprehensive overview of how China governs risks from advanced AI. Let me start with 3 key features of China's domestic approach to AI governance. The first is that the Chinese government really is focused on diffusing AI applications across the entire economy, rather than rushing ahead to AGI or superintelligence, as for instance shown by government initiatives like the AI Plus initiative. The second is that overall, senior Chinese officials do not really view AI capabilities development and safety as a zero-sum. One quote that illustrates this point quite well comes from China's Executive Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang, who said that if the braking system isn't under control, you can't step on the accelerator with confidence. And just for context here, Ding is the number 6 official in China and the most senior official in charge of science and technology work specifically. And then the third is that the AI safety concerns have really been elevated in China over the past year. In April last year, China's top 24 officials held a study session on AI where President Xi Jinping noted that AI brings, quote, unprecedented risks and challenges. And if we kind of compare the readout from that meeting to previous high-level statements on AI safety, the content was really much more detailed this time, for instance, describing the need for distinct stages of AI governance, such as risk monitoring, early warning, and emergency response. China has introduced a range of binding regulations for AI, starting as early as 2022, which is much earlier than many other major countries. And these regulations early on covered recommendation algorithms and then also generative AI, including requirements to label AI-generated content and most recently also specific provisions for so-called human-like interactive AI services or AI companions. The key point is that these regulations have introduced a filing and registration process, and this process requires safety tests on various risks, where Chinese regulators have to be given pre-deployment access to models and approve them. If we want to get a kind of preview of where AI safety governance in China might be headed next, we can look at the AI Safety Governance Framework 2.0 published by TC260, which is China's key AI standard setting body. And this framework really covers a wide range of risks, including but not limited to frontier risks like AI misuse in cybersecurity or chemical and bioweapon development and loss of control. Internationally, China has really consistently reinforced two central priorities in its AI diplomacy. The first is on bridging the global AI divide, where President Xi has, for instance, warned that AI could become, quote, a game of the rich countries, and China has promoted AI capacity building initiatives at the UN. And then the second is safe and controlled AI development, where, for instance, bilateral dialogues between China and the US and China and the UK likely included discussions on AI safety, though the dialogue with the US has unfortunately not convened since May 2024. And then in the meantime, there's also a very solid network of track 2 dialogues. As for technical AI safety research, we have also created a public data set of frontier AI safety papers from Chinese authors from April 2023 to May 25. And as you can see, such publications have really increased significantly over the time period, and the broad research directions have stayed roughly the same and are dominated by alignment work and robustness work. Finally, let's very briefly look at voluntary safety actions taken by the Chinese industry. For our report, we have also systematically reviewed the technical model cards of 13 major Chinese foundation model developers. And when we wrote the report back in July 2025, only 3 of those model cards had a dedicated section on safety, and only 3 had reported any kind of safety evaluation results. However, since then, there have been some newer model cards with more detailed safety sections, and in particular, the publication of DeepSeek R1 in Nature really marked the first time that any widely used large language model has gone through such independent peer review. Overall, our report really shows how various actors in China are grappling with the same governance challenges as their global peers, which means that global cooperation on these issues should really be possible. And I'm happy to talk more about this at a poster session later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we now have our final panel presentation from Mattea Franklin from Google DeepMind.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Mattia, and today I will be presenting distributed AGI safety in emerging Asian economies. This presentation is based on 2 previous papers that we've written titled Virtual Asian Economies and Distributional AGI Safety. And in them, we argued that a new economic layer is emerging, so one in which agents will increasingly transact, negotiate, coordinate, and compete at machine speed. And the challenges that this sort of agentic web brings about are primarily challenges of environmental design. So the rules, incentives, and structures that the digital ecosystem will have that agents inhabit. And this is because an individually aligned agent can still cause harm if the environment is poorly designed, the same way a technically proficient and law-abiding driver can cause a traffic incident in a road where the rules are not specified. So the sort of like backdrop of this talk is that today millions of agents are deployed across different industries. So we have coding agents that are regularly debugging and deploying software. We have customer service agents that are resolving all sorts of disputes, and then also enterprise workflow agents that deal with logistics. And each of these agents are increasingly making decisions that are very consequential. So they are spending money, they are accessing private data, and in some cases, they are even modifying real-world environments and states. And so we predict that in the future, nearly every user of the internet will have their own personal AI agent that will be deployed to do different tasks, and also most organizations will employ AI agents to complete tasks as well. And we argue that the sort of like economic trajectory is unmistakable in that as AI agents grow more capable, they will not only operate in isolation, but they will also transact with one another, forming what we call a virtual agent economy. We believe that OpenClaw is an early example of such an agent economy or environment. So OpenClaw is an open source agent platform, and most people use it for personal assistant use cases where it performs tasks on computers. But also another way of thinking about OpenClaw is that it is a broad agent infrastructure, and is an infrastructure that allows agents to operate on different channels and contexts. And they're increasingly getting deployed in online shared environments where they interact in multi-agent settings. A very famous example of this is Maltbook, which is sort of an online social media for such agents. And so in our mind, the question is no longer whether such economies will emerge, but under what rules. And this involves deciding things such as whether these economies will have their own currencies, reputation systems, and governance structures, but then also whether they're going to be tightly sandboxed or permeable, interfacing with real-world financial systems and critical infrastructure. And sort of the goal of these mechanisms in many ways is to stop a chaotic and dysfunctional market, but we also believe that there might be a more sort of like hidden and potentially more dangerous problem that we call the problem of distribution or distributed AGI safety. And here, it is often assumed that the main safety problem of aligning a single powerful model is mostly what we're going to have to deal with in the near future. But what happens in such a scenario when capability is composed through markets via specialization, delegation, coalition formation, and even the creation of agentic firms and institutions? And so here, the Patrick AGI hypothesis posits that AGI-level performance may arise as a property of a distributed system spread across interacting agents rather than concentrated in one model. And while this notion is not necessarily a new one, people like Eric Drexler have talked about this before, we argue that it's sort of a blind spot in the safety community and that it definitely requires more attention. And so with this in mind, in our paper, we focus on different aspects of safety and governance for this sort of like distributed world of intelligence. And we argue that it requires a focus on system-level control rather than the sort of like baseline agentic safety that is talked about most of the time. And so this includes things such as market design, monitoring and oversight, and regulatory mechanisms. And so just with the sort of time I have left to give some examples, things that are important here are things such as incentive alignment, so thinking about taxes and penalties for externalities. One externality that agents often cause is the modeling of the sort of like epistemic environment that we operate in. Other things that we can consider here are things such as circuit breakers for preventing cascading failures, as well as cryptographic ideas for agents that can be linked to their legal owners. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I think in this panel discussion, it may be worth highlighting some of the new concepts that have come through in the talk. So we've heard more about AGI, about agents, and about artificial superintelligence, and the potentially kind of unique governance challenges they raise. But before diving into the governance challenges, perhaps I could invite some of the presenters to give a kind of fuller articulation of what they think these terms mean. Particularly the artificial superintelligence is one that people may not be familiar with. And then for Chihai, there was a question about, which one of these technologies, or if it is any of them, you think raises this kind of like political legitimacy question. So perhaps you can go first. Yeah.
I think when I think about superintelligence, I mean AI systems that are smarter than humans across effectively all cognitive tasks. They're able to do everything that you could do, but better. You can make spreadsheets, you can write stories, you can convince people, you can be a compelling romantic partner and a storyteller, you can invent new science, you can do all of these things, and AI systems are just better at this than you are, and better than the best humans on Earth.
Well, thank you for the question.
I would like to say that it's not only about the type of technology that we're going to have to talk about, but it's about the characteristics of what type of AGI or AI that we're going to talk about. Meaning that if we are going to be able to have human in the loop in a level of, like being able to actually have meaningful inputs to merge in the challenges that we are thinking of in terms of political or economic dynamics or philosophical even. However, like if it's just, even if it's a simple AI, if we don't have like any inputs or co-authorship or whatsoever that humans can actually get involved in, well, that would be a problem. So I think it's the matter of like, how to define the algorithm itself and how to build the data sets and algorithms to having more meaningful outputs that people want would be the essential question rather than the types itself. Thank you.
I think I want to perhaps somewhat challenge like some of the underlying assumption of when we talk about AGI or superintelligence. I think especially kind of in the US-China context, it's often phrased as a kind of race to superintelligence, who will get there first. And I think I want to challenge that a bit. I think like the assumption there is that if there's a race, there has to be some kind of finish line, right? Like where like some distinct point in time when you reach superintelligence, and that's the finish line. I think, at least in China, I don't think that that's like how the political leadership thinks about this. For instance, President Xi Jinping recently in a speech on AI, the way he described AI is like as something similar to electricity. And electricity is very much like a technology where there's no distinct endpoint, right? Like the question of which country won the race to get electricity first is not really a very meaningful question to ask. And the more important question is perhaps like which country was more successful in meaningfully diffusing electricity throughout the economy, actually using it in productive ways. And in many ways, that's a process that is taking a very long time, right? Like we have electricity for more than 100 years and we're still like trying to electrify our cars now. So I think if that's like the way you think about AI, I'm not sure whether this IASEAI framing is so meaningful in a way.
Thank you. Matteo, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, in relation to your question on sort of defining terms, I guess like the perspective that we bring is that this potential sort of like AGI that's emerging might be better thought of in terms of a system. And the purpose of a system from a cybernetics perspective is what it does, right? And so given that, a lot of people in this room are very concerned with sort of monitoring and benchmarking these models as they get released, what we're arguing for is that we might also want to look at, like the system that is producing these outcomes as it might come earlier to the finishing line, if there is one, not that there is one, before the sort of individual components.
Thank you so much. So a number of the questions from the audience center on essentially skepticism that there could be some kind of AI pause or ban, and that there's like the political willingness to do this. So it's partly a US-China question. It's also a cross-lab coordination question. So if any of the panelists would like to speak to the feasibility of this proposal and how they think it fits into these underlying dynamics, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of words, but I'd be interested in hearing the panelists' views as well. I think obviously this is not a politically feasible proposal today, but I think if I'm correct and the AI systems do get as powerful as I expect they will, and many experts expect they will, I expect the world to wake up substantially. And maybe this will like open the door to this kind of proposal. I hope this doesn't require some disaster to happen to really wake people up, but I do fear that it might.
Yeah, I think I can just build a little bit on what I just said about kind of ASI. I think some of the specific proposals that you listed, like for instance, the need to first centralize compute resources to then better monitor them. I think at least right now from our research in the Chinese ecosystem, I don't see like that there is a strong push to centralize resources, and especially if you have this very diffusion-focused framing, I think there could be pushback against that. Not because you like want to race to AGI and want to evade being monitored, but just because like your kind of economic priority right now isn't centralization, if that makes sense.
Thank you so much. And a question for Mate and for Chihai. So I think conversely, or actually maybe relatedly, a lot of people are asking, they said, from your presentations, it seems like you imagine AI will be distributed widely throughout society, and that we will need it either to be kind of legitimated in new ways or governed through markets and networks. But is it possible that AI could just become very, very concentrated in such a way that these kind of more distributed mechanisms don't have such a role to play, and it's just a matter of people who have it and people who don't?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this first. So yeah, I think it's like absolutely possible, right? We're very much not arguing that, our paper predicts exactly how the next sort of like 5 to 10 years are going to like unfold. But I think that like the sort of like open source releases that I've seen recently have made me update my opinion for how things might progress, in that it seems like people are gaining capabilities that are very close to the frontier by sort of like using multi-agent systems and open source models that are maybe like ever so slightly away from like the maximum amount of capability. And so I guess the sort of like question that gets raised then is, if you're the very first to get to this sort of like more sort of like monolith AI capability, does that allow you to capture power that stops the rest of the players from then distributing their intelligence?
Well, yeah, I think it's a very important question in a sense that we have to understand that who's going to have the access to use if it's concentrated AI, meaning that I would think that if it's going to be concentrated, like in the use of AI, highly likely going to be the political elites would have an access to it. So as long as they're used by political elites or in the public sector, they don't have public consent or legitimate authority to make any kind of decisions that's kind of made based on the social contract theory. However, if they are still used in that sense, the questions that we asked in this panel would be still sustaining, I guess. So it's not only the matter of concentration, but then like it's the matter of like who uses what and how would be the very good question and important question for us to think about. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we can have a round of applause for our panelists for the excellent presentations.